Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey Bob, thank you so much for joining me today. I am super thrilled to have you as my guest.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on your webcast here.
Most certainly. Well, I've known you for quite some time, but I'm pretty sure maybe not a lot of people who are not familiar with Bob Perkins. Can you share a little bit about who Bob Perkins is?
Well, I'm a golfer. I'm a father, a husband. I try to golf almost every day. But no, I kind of grew up I taught school for a couple of years, and then it was crazy. So I moved into sales. So the majority of my career has been in the sales profession, more specifically inside sales, right? And hence where I am today.
Yeah, and obviously from that, you became, I'm assuming you started as an individual contributor, became a sales leader, and then finally you decided it's time that I start an association. How did that ever come about?
Well, I was an individual contributor for a short period. Wasn't crazy about sales. In fact, people ask me, "Oh, you must be such a good sales rep." I go, "Well, I can sell, but it wasn't my thing." I knew I wanted to lead. I knew I wanted to manage things and build things. So I quickly got into leadership, and then made this change to inside sales leadership. Within a year or two of leading inside sales, I had fallen in love for what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the reason was back when I got my start in the early 90s, so this is 25, 26, 27 years ago, inside sales was kind of, they're the lower class, the first step into sales. And if you really want to be successful, you're going to get into field sales, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I said, I'll be damned with this, right? I quickly had a mission. My mission was to prove that inside sales could sell as effectively as face-to-face. And here we are, 26, 27 years later, and we kind of know what the rest of the story was. So, and as I worked for a few different companies, building and improving, growing their inside sales teams, I realized, boy, we didn't have many resources. I looked for inside sales professional training. I couldn't find much. I tried to go see what other people were doing for hiring and coaching and compensation. Couldn't find anything. So I began to form a small thought leadership network. And we'd share ideas kind of informally. I'd go to a company and I'd look and benchmark how they're doing inside sales. And I knew back then that we needed something like the AA-ISP. So after thinking about doing it for 3 years, I finally said, we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And, here we are.
Yeah, I was looking at your LinkedIn. It's been 12 years. In May is when I see that you started this. So kind of crazy that we're talking almost 12 years after that you started this. It's a crazy journey. So obviously, as you said, right, when you were in the field, like you doing it, you saw a lot of changes. And how has your outlook on inside sales or sales as a function, how has that changed over the years, especially with the advent of technology and the automation and everything that we're seeing coming into that space?
Well, I'll tell you that from the buyer's perspective. We tend to always think about how we have changed as sales people, but I think the big change has been in the buying process. Today, I like to say that buyers have been Amazonized, right? Meaning I can fire up Amazon search, I can get reviews, I can get technical data. I once had to buy a mini plug for my for a Bose headset, and it had 7 wires in it, and I'm like, I'm used to 2 wires. So I pulled up a schematic online and figured out how to solder the wires. So they can do research. And so buyers want to be met the way they want to be met by salespeople. And it has changed. Mm-hmm. They don't rely quite as much on them. But when they do rely on them, they want a thought leader and a partner. Mm-hmm. Technology has made it possible to go face-to-face. You and I right now are face-to-face. Mm-hmm. We know through research that oxytocin is released when we see each other. We smile. You smile. So we can engage and build trust with customers over the phone, via video, via email. So that's, that hence this pandemic we're in now, everyone's thrust into their home, and we're not missing much of a beat, really.
Mm-hmm. So you believe, if anything, the technology has only enhanced the way that we were able to sell. It hasn't really basically hindered our ability to be able to do that.
Oh, not at all. In fact, now a busy decision maker can just, call someone. They can do a video call right on their iPhone. So it's enhanced. And it doesn't mean it does not mean at all face-to-face is going away. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. In fact, I predict a little bit when we come through this thing in a year from now, it may even be more valuable to actually go in person. So there's no such thing as the death of the field salesperson. Now, that said, even field salespeople now, what they thought they would never do, they have to do. I spoke to 30 IBM reps last week, and I was teaching them about some best practices of being in a home office and still having to prospect and to sell. So, yeah.
So it's a complete shift, a mindset shift almost in terms of how that goes. Obviously, you kind of were trying to make some predictions there. Where do you see as the technology is advancing? I mean, you're hearing about sales automation, sales sequencing. I mean, people are actually hiding behind a little computer and doing spinning thousands of plates at a given time, right? So where do you see this actually heading as the sales organization evolve?
Well, I see a bit of a gap, and I think you're right. I think technology, AI, things like that, there's a lot of good. Mm-hmm. But also, I believe the human, the heart and soul and the empathy of a human being got just kind of knocked a little bit to the side, right? So I think we're going to see a resurgence in the human connection, right? That's why I like video so much, because before we started doing this live video or even one-way video, all we had was this. Today, if I turned off my video and we were talking over the phone, it wouldn't feel good to me. I'm like, well, I can't look in your eyes. I can't smile. I can't see you smile. So, but it's not going to stop there, right? We're going to have holograms. We're going to, we're all going to have these little video Dick Tracy watches, right? So technology is going to continue to evolve, but we can't let the human component be left aside. In fact, we even see some gaps in our salespeople, quite honestly. Mm-hmm. They're so technology enabled, they're multitasking, they're not good listeners. Mm-hmm. What is good listening skill? Well, it's a human skill, right? What's good communication skill? Mm-hmm. It's a human skill. So let's not get too far away.
Yeah, and I think, I'm like a note taker, and I don't know, I think I have like this, I can remember after 3 months of having that intro meeting, I remember exactly what all the pain that my prospect shared with me 3 months ago, that I don't need to reference the CRM notes. But I know today, people are like, oh, if I don't have my CRM, I'm handicapped. I don't know what they said, right? Because we're too dependent on that. But I think you brought up a good point, because you can't eliminate the human factor from sales, especially in the B2B high ticket sales sector, right? Because we're always going to need to have that. I know software companies are changing that a little bit. I know companies like HubSpot all have you self-serve. You come in, you download your the free trial, and then you like it, you upgrade to something higher packages and all that stuff. But I think at the end of the day, I don't know if we're ever going to get to a place where completely we're removed from ever having a sales rep sell to another human beings. But I think with everything else happening in the technology sector, what do you think still some of the fundamental characteristics that you see in really good A-player salespeople that's evergreen?
You see kind of this fire in the belly, right? This persistence, this eagerness, this goal orientation that they're going to push as hard as they need to push. They're going to push themselves. They're going to block out time specific for prospecting. There's a regimen, and sales just don't happen, right? They, you can only get so many bluebirds coming in at the end of the quarter, right? So it takes a lot of grit and determination. So I think that's a big one. I really do. I do think critical listening skills and really delivering value back to the customer based on their needs and based on what they really need to help them, not based on every feature that your product offers. I like to use this little phrase, keep it in the bag. Well, back many, many years ago, even before, I guess when I got my start in salespeople actually carried a bag or a briefcase. I used the word briefcase the other day to some millennial, and they go, what the hell is that? What's a briefcase? I heard of that. And good salespeople would not pitch or show the product until they fully knew that their product could help, and they earned the right to present it. So I tell people today, just shut your mouth, ask questions, keep the product in the bag, and learn as much as you can. Because if you let the other person talk and you listen and you clarify for understanding, you're gonna find some things that you can probably help with.
Yeah, and I think that critical listening factor, I think I've often seen that to be something that people overlook because they've done so many discovery calls. They just kind of like, hey, I know how to prescribe before I ever diagnosed, right? And that's just the nature of salespeople. Like, I just want to jump to that close. I don't want to spend the time to get to know this guy. I already know what his problem is, right? That's just a nature that I think, once you've been in the profession and with the same company or selling the same product over and over, I think you can get into that mode. And do you think detrimental to somebody's ability to sell better?
The premature pitch, right? Totally. I couldn't agree with you more. There's a woman named Jill Rowley. Jill was known for being a social selling expert, 7, 8, 9 years ago. And she made this comment once, I'll never forget it. She goes, seek to understand before you try to be understood. Well, a lot of inexperienced salespeople, you need to hear me. I need to be understood. I know this can help you. But they haven't sought to understand first. I love that simple phrase.
That's almost like a good relationship advice too. Not just in sales.
Yeah.
A lot of times we have this tendency, I want them to understand my side of the story, right? Like that's just our human tendency sometimes. So obviously you talked a little bit about the actual individual contributor, what some of the things that takes them to be a good high-performing sales rep. What about for a sales leader? What have you seen to be critical character for a sales leader?
I could talk about this all day. This is the near and dear to my heart. And every day I look through a daily guide on leadership, a daily devotional that talks about different traits. A big one for me is you no longer have an individual identity. You no longer, it's not about you anymore. When you become a leader, it flips from an individual contributor, which is all about you, right? Well, yes, it's about your customer, taking care of them. Yes, it is. But when you're an individual contributor, you have to make the next deal. You have to hit your goals. You have to win. You have to have a good close rate. As a leader, it flips it completely around, and now it's about a collective group. Now, maybe you might have 8 reps, you might have 3 reps, you might have 300 reps, right? But now the group as a whole now becomes the most important sacred thing that you have been entrusted with. Okay. And you need to, at all costs, a leader has to protect and motivate and guard and care for and mentor this group. Sure, they may coach an individual, they may mentor an individual, but the group is above any player on the team. It's kind of like the basketball team, and they have this person that just is so great, and they're hogging the ball. Well, you know what'll happen, right? So I often tell I often share thoughts about if you have one bad attitude on a team, let's say you have a team of 10, you have someone with a bad attitude, that the leader has to be so careful to guard the other 9 people that if they have to, they'll remove the attitude. I've known leaders that had to remove a bad attitude, and it was their number 1 rep. But then after that, months later, the whole team starts producing better because they're not sucked down with a bad attitude.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you made. Obviously, something that I recently heard, it's from my pastor who used an illustration from the sports arena. He said Phil Jackson, when he was the coach of the Chicago Bulls, and then when Michael Jordan was actually, when he was brought on, and then Michael Jordan wanted to have championship, and then Phil told him, for you to get championship, you got to miss 15 shots in a game or something like that. Basically, don't make those 15 shots, because if you keep hugging the ball, nobody else is going to make the shots, and then you're never going to get that championship because you're the only player that the whole team is built around. Which is crazy. I think he came back to Chicago and made 6 championship or something. But he certainly took that advice and let other people in his team play that. But I think we don't necessarily think that way in sales, because we still come down to hey, I'm my quota. I have to deal with what I have to do to win my deal, which is kind of hard at the end of the day. We're all in it for the company and not just individually for yourself.
And inside sales has a unique dynamic because it was brought up. It was raised on teamwork. It really was. Yeah, you might have a discrete quota. Individuals have their own quota, but they're there together. Yeah. They're learning together. They're winning together. So I think, you want someone that's
star player.
You want star players, right? But you got to have a balance of teamwork in there as well.
Yeah. In your bio, I was reading something about you. You said something about team selling. What exactly is that, by the way?
Well, team selling. It's not as common as it used to be, but back when inside sales really took off in the early 2000s and 2005, 10, back in those days, most companies, especially the high-tech firms, most of them had a team selling model, meaning I paired an inside rep with 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 field reps. The inside rep did all sorts of stuff. They could help the field rep with something. They could go close a small deal, but they were sort of beholden to the field rep to give them guidance and direction and do whatever they needed to help make the field rep more successful. That's a team selling model. Now, it still exists today. The discrete model is these inside reps have their own accounts. There's no field reps on these accounts. They're owned by inside sales, and they got to close down the quota. What we found in the last about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it was about a 50-50 split between those deploying a field model and those deploying discrete. Well, today it's probably 65% discrete because we always knew inside sales could stand alone as a sales person. But there's still some models that team models work very well at.
Yeah, and I think this whole concept of division of labor almost, you have the SDR versus AE function almost, right? That's something is making a comeback. I think in the past they used to say the appointment setter, which was not as sexy as it sounds, as sales development rep, right? So I think that shift is almost what I think you're describing. You have a junior rep who's becoming that AE, that he's booking appointments, and then grow up to becoming that account executive in the future, and hopefully being a leader in the future. But obviously, you've touched on some of the skills and all those things that are required to be a pro player. But what my question here is, you see those people in your team that they have the will, they have the know-how, right? They have the skill, but that the willingness is lacking, right? So that I've seen to be a big problem with an organization, because there's that player that guy can be an MVP if he just put his mind into it. But something is not right? Is it the organization? Is it the product? Is it the leadership? How do you kind of uncover that problem?
Well, that's a good question. I immediately go to culture. I go to expectations. I've been fortunate enough to have built a few different inside sales models and teams. And the way a good leader can foster a great culture, for me, a great culture looks like this. If you join the team, the expectations are here. Nobody has to look over your shoulder and micromanage you did you make your, if you have a manager, I'll tell you right now, kind of cut through this pretty quick. You have a manager that's always talking about activity metrics, you got a bad situation. A manager should not have to do that. When people are onboarded and they're coaching and training, of course you got to talk about activity, right? But a great culture is where the reps would feel horrible and be highly disappointed if they didn't meet the expectations themselves. Because if you're in a good, high-performing organization with a good culture, you don't want to disappoint, and you want to meet these expectations. In other words, you're self-motivated, right? The leader then is one who trusts at all cost, who blows wind in people's sails, who really has to be a bit of a cheerleader motivator. I remember once early in my management career, I had another peer manager saying, "It's not my job to motivate the team." And I'm like, that's your number one job, buddy. Now, it doesn't mean if you got some sluggard on the team that has no will or motivation that you have to fix it. No, it doesn't mean that, but you have to set a high example. I love a leader who's high trust, cares about people, but also has really high expectations, but doesn't have to micromanage it to get there.
Yeah. So imagine that you had that challenge getting started because you didn't have a high performance team, or the people were in with you to get to that level of culture that you want. What are some practical steps an organization can take to improve upon?
There's a great book out there, and I know the title. It's called "Don't Fire Them, Fire Them Up," and it was about a Xerox district manager who inherited like the 49th out of the 50th worst district in Xerox. And he went in and he led by example. He told the truth. He went on more sales calls than his reps went on. And so sometimes you have to lead by example. You have to inspect what you expect. You have to get out there and set the example of what a motivated rep looks like and what they do. And he turned, I think within 2 years, he became number 2 or number 1 in the company. So you can't accept, you have to have a high expectation, but you have to also have a high tolerance. You have to be patient. You have to show empathy. But you got to keep those expectations high, and you got to model them yourself. You got to be, I was often the first one in and the last one to go, right? Because that's how you build trust. One time years ago, I inherited a new team. I was a director and I had 4 or 5 managers under me. They put a new team in, and I had a lot going on, but I decided to go check in on this new team, and I sat down with a rep, and he was struggling getting people to talk on the phone. So I said, "Do you mind if I make a couple calls?" And he kind of looks at me and goes, "Sure." So I got on the phone, I made some calls, and he listened. Now I was a director. I wasn't the frontline manager of this team. And about 20 years later, it wasn't that, maybe 15, 16 years later, my son goes to work at that same company that I was the director at. And he bumps into this guy and meets, I'm Brian Perkins. Brian, did you know Bob Perkins? And Brian goes, "Yeah, he's my dad." And the guy goes, "I got to tell you something." He goes, "I've been doing this for 20 some years, and he's the only manager that ever came over and modeled how to make a phone call." And so that made me feel good, like, not that I was doing anything great, but it sent a message to me that we need more leaders like that out there.
It's not just do as I say, but not as I do.
Right. You got to model. You do have to model the tone, the culture, the behavior you want.
Yeah, most certainly. So obviously, the progression most people have is like, hey, I start as an individual contributor. I want to become a sales leader. Someday I become, some higher level, right, in the corporation. Mm-hmm. So what advice do you have for somebody who's an aspiring guy, who's an amazing individual contributor, to kind of get to that next level in his career?
Well, they may or may not be cut out for management. I've seen many times, and we've all heard this, that your number one or number two player doesn't automatically become a great leader. Part of that is what I talked about before. They're so self-motivated, and they are so, focused on winning that next deal that right there doesn't translate too well to leadership, because it's a flip of that. I often tell people this today. If I had to go be a sales rep, I could do it. I wouldn't want to do it. I might even fail at it, quite honestly, because that's not my calling, right? My calling is to help other people. So you have to have a strong calling. You have to want it for the right reasons. It's not about money. It's not about recognition, although it's nice to get recognition as a leader. We all like it. But it's really about recognizing others and helping others make a lot of money and making the team successful as a whole. So you gotta have the right motivation before you think, well, I've been a rep for 5 years, it's time to be a manager. You gotta want it.
Yeah. So, the big companies are luxurious. They have the luxury, right? Like, especially the tech companies that are well-funded. They have multiple tiers of leadership. You have the sales operation person, SDRs, AEs. Then you have the VP of sales and, directors and all sorts of stuff like that. But smaller organizations don't have that luxury, right? So, right. And then you have sometimes what you have, like an individual contributor who's also playing a little bit of a coach, and he's also a manager. And I know it's not the ideal scenario, but what would you recommend in those scenarios for the business that's trying to make one person function as a couple of different roles?
Don't do it. It's I've done it. I've lived that many times. I never liked, in few cases, I've never really liked somebody wearing two hats, right? Being both a player and a leader. Part of the reason is, if somebody's in a team leader role and they're struggling, the first thing I ask them, can you hire and fire? It's the first thing I ask them. Well, not really. Well, then you're not, you're really not you may be a helper, but you're really not, you don't have the full responsibility to make it your team, right? So I'm not saying don't take a sales rep and then give them some responsibility to mentor someone, to do a presentation in a staff meeting. Believe me, those are great ways to help bring someone up, to make them a senior rep, maybe to say, hey, you 3 reps here, go to Mary as kind of this senior rep, and if she can't help you, then escalate it. Those are all great things, but be so darn careful of taking a quota-driven sales rep and giving them another job to oversee people. It's tough. It's tough to even define, how much you can do and can't do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it doesn't leave room for coaching and training up that rep who might be struggling. But we've seen this to be the case with a lot of smaller organizations, especially because they just don't have the finances to fund that VP of sales or the director role or whatever those things are, or sales managers. Right. Then you kind of put, this person, my CRO, but he's also the manager and also carries his own quota.
Well, look, we're AA-ISP, we're small. We have 10 people. So everybody wears a lot of hats around here. I mean, I'll do everything, right? So that's okay. But just be careful of really, are you expecting them to manage or just to help? There's a big difference.
Makes sense. And I'm sure, in your career, obviously building this association for the last, 12 years and being a sales leader in the prior jobs, have you heard some very foolish advice that you've heard salespeople getting from other people? Like, can you think of some?
I'm trying to think of, here's one I've heard a lot. and I can't disagree with it anymore. Sales is just a numbers game. Okay, sales is a numbers game. Oh my gosh, no. You want to know how I know it's absolutely not a numbers game? And that is, if it was as easy as making 60 calls and 30 emails a day, anybody could do it. Oh, it's a numbers game. Oh, so I make 60 calls, I'm going to automatically hit my quota? No. In fact, I've had reverse correlations between activity and results. How do you figure? Oh, something called human, something called quality, something called listening skills, something called empathy, something called grit, determination, organizational skills. So it's not just a numbers game. It doesn't mean activity. Activity is very important, very, very important. But if you show me someone that what do you want me to meet? 60 calls, 30 emails, this cadence, that cadence. Anybody could do it. And you and I know that not a lot of people can do it.
Yeah.
Just look at our statistics on those making quota. It's hovering around 50%. So what does that tell you? It's a tough job. I mean, I didn't last in it very long. I got right into management, but it's a tough, it's one of the hardest jobs in the world, but yet if we didn't have people taking orders, nobody else would have jobs.
Yeah.
And, revenue is what makes the world turn.
That's true.
And companies work, and it's salespeople that get the revenue.
But I think it also comes down to what you're selling, because oftentimes what I've seen is people who are not passionate about what they're selling. Then it's just a chore. It's a job, and they're just paying the bill with it. And then you can smell that when they're coming to you, right? Whereas somebody who believes their product, believes in that company, believes what they're selling is going to help the other organization, then they're not selling, they're actually helping, right? When that shift happens in their mind, then everything becomes a lot more natural for them. And it's
more natural. It's second nature. Although I will say, I've seen some of the opposite, that I've seen a great salesperson find a way to believe in the product they're selling. You know what I mean? They get their mind around it. And so some, I've seen some salespeople that fail that said, I'm not sure I really believe in the company and the product. But really what it is, they're just not getting after it. You know what I mean? So it can be an excuse. But to your point, I agree. I've seen where people have, I really understand this now. Now I know where it fits in, and they're more confident selling it.
So looking back on your career, and I'm sure there's been a lot of people you influenced, and I'm sure there has been some folks that has influenced you. Is there anybody that comes to mind that actually influenced your leadership style or your overall, career as a whole?
Well, I had a couple of great brothers growing up that I learned some amazing lessons from. I had a brother, no longer alive, but he taught leadership at West Point. He was a West Point graduate. He taught leadership, and he modeled leadership, right? He was the one out when they went on exercises out in the field that he was a captain, and instead of riding in the captain's Jeep, he was running, literally, jogging out in front of the pack. So I learned from him. My mom, my parents were great teachers to me. My mom was the first female pilot of an airplane where we grew up in upstate New York. In fact, she flew for the Civil Air Patrol and recently was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal for that. So, I had a mom who was, she was out there leading the charge, so to speak, So, yeah, I would say family, mostly. Some good peers, some good folks around the community, some good books. I'm looking at a lot of the leadership books over there that I have, and yeah, most certainly. I think, like you said, if you have a family, and sometimes we don't really give them the credit that they deserve, but oftentimes I think our family plays a big part, because you've spent almost good half of your life with them, right? And some are fortunate to have great parents who really mentored them and encouraged them to get to where they are in life. Obviously, your son was an example. You just shared the story of where he wanted to be a lawyer. I never dreamed in a million years. I thought when he graduated college, I said, the last thing he's going to do is go into sales. And now he's a manager, right? He was individual contributor and won a couple of president's clubs and took me to one of the clubs as his guest. I said, wait a minute, you can take your dad to P Club? And he goes, yeah, people do it. I go, okay.
Must be a nice son that he decided it was more fun to be with his dad.
Yeah.
So if you can actually go back, right, like the 27 years ago, the Bob Perkins, what advice would you give your younger self with knowing what you know today?
Oh boy, the number of mistakes I've made, too many to count. I don't know. I'd say just slow down a little bit. Life is short. Smell the roses. Be extra kind to those that you love. Things like that. But yeah.
Would you do anything differently if you were to do it again? I know you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's a lot I do differently. Yeah, there sure is. Yeah. I think anybody looks back and says, boy, if I had done that, or if I had done that, or if I hadn't done that, yeah, there's things I do differently. But, no regrets or no disappointments other than, take a little time,
A lot of times I think our life experience is what shapes us who we are, right?
Yeah.
That I think it's almost required, those life experiences to kind of mold us and make us into the resilient people that we are.
Right.
Yeah. Obviously, my closing question is, we're all salespeople. Whether you are the founder, whatever function you play, we still have that sales function, right? We have that hat. Are there any productivity hack that Bob Perkins have that everybody should be kind of following, or at least try to adapt?
In terms of like AA-ISP resources,
what like anything that you do in terms of like productivity, like, hey, how do you stay, how do you make sure that you're
productivity? Yeah. There's a couple of things I did in my career that I thought were real helpful. I would, after the kids went to bed, and this could be a different time for you, but after the kids went to bed Sunday night, I actually drove into the office. And why'd I do that? Because I wanted to clear my inbox, fix my calendar, and then start listing up what I need to accomplish the following week. So when I got in Monday morning, I was ready to go. So many people get in Monday morning. Let's see. Well, I got to get my coffee here. I got to turn the computer on. I got to look at my emails I forgot to reply to last week. And 2 hours in, they're now starting to plan the week. So that was a big help for me. I am not the most organized. I'm kind of a disorganized person because I'm doing a lot of multitasking. That was a big help for me. That's one. I think the other one is from looking to advance your career, that a simple value I have is that you are 100% responsible for you and where you go and how you get there. Bad things are going to happen to you. You're going to get bosses that aren't very good. We've all had them. You're going to have coworkers that maybe you don't get along with, but never allow that to be an excuse for your own performance and your own advancement. I'm a firm believer in that. And the minute you start doing that, making excuses, you've failed. So I got to where I'm at because I believed in that was largely up to me to get myself there. And hopefully that'll help.
Yeah, most certainly. And I think a lot of times I think you have the tendency, right? Like some people just sit there and complain about what's going wrong as opposed to seeing that as an opportunity and making something out of it. And if you look at any successful entrepreneur's story, they were in like, maybe a couple of them may have had the silver spoon in their mouth when they came out of their mother's womb, but most of them had to work their hardest to get to where they are, right? And nothing is easy in life. right? So that's an encouraging note and obviously some wisdom from you. So I appreciate you sparing this afternoon with me and sharing some of your insights. And I'm glad that we're able to do this. And thanks again, Bob, for joining me.
No, thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.